Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 9th annual California Banjo Extravaganza Banjo Mini Camp with yours truly, Bill Evans, Allison DeGroot, and BB Bowness. And we're going to be presenting 3 one-hour workshops with 15-minute breaks. And then we'll all come together for one final session where we can answer your questions, do a concert preview of tonight's show, which is going to be beaming from the Freight and Salvage one-night-only event at 5 o'clock. And if you have just signed on in the last 5 or 10 minutes, Allegra Thompson is our Freight and Salvage staff person, co-host, and we're asking folks to keep their microphones muted. But if you have a question, which questions will come up for sure, you can type them in the chat and I will see them, or Allegra will direct them to me. And don't forget that the videos of all of these sessions will be available on an unlisted YouTube channel as soon as I edit them and post them up, hopefully by Monday or Tuesday, and I will send out an email. And thank you for joining us. This is so terrific to have so many people be here and come together for the love of the banjo. For those of you who are not in California, this is something that we do every year normally in California, and our Saturday of our tour is devoted to a day of workshops at the Freight and Salvage and a concert that night. It's the highlight of the tour every year, and I'm grateful for the Freight and Salvage for doing this year's tour online with the concert tonight at 5 o'clock and this workshop with Allison, BB, and myself. All right, so I hope that everybody has downloaded the tabs. My session is only one sheet of paper, which I know is really unusual for those of you who know me. And let's just hit the ground running. I wanted to really focus in on one particular topic that is troublesome and has been a challenge for just about every student that I've ever had in terms of understanding the concept and then also using the techniques to create their own music. And that technique is the forward roll. And if you happen to be a clawhammer player who is here just to check out what I'm doing, this kind of information, I know that a lot of old-time players are getting into 3-finger styles, and that is terrific news. And this forward roll is one of the secrets that 3-finger banjo players will have that gives you a different sound than what you can get from downstroke or clawhammer style. So in a broad stroke, what forward rolls employ or encompass is that we're going that direction with our 3 fingers. But there are a lot of different ways to do this. So in some cases, if we're learning, say, an alternating thumb roll or another roll, there's really one order of fingers. With the forward roll, that's not true. But as long as you maintain within a measure or a 2-measure phrase, this downward motion, TIM, or starting with the index or the middle, we don't necessarily have to start with the thumb, you're going to get the sound of the forward roll. Now, the forward roll is very, very exciting. I was playing Fireball Mail a minute ago, and that tune is made up almost entirely of forward rolls. And one thing that is important is if you can get used to the sound of hearing what the roll sounds like. And for me, in order to figure that out, I am oftentimes hearing, when does the 5th string, when do we hear the 5th string? And that will help me determine which roll is being played if I'm trying to figure out what somebody is doing from a record. But the forward roll has a very distinctive pattern of 3 against our rhythm, which would be called duple rhythm, 2 or 4, depending upon how we're counting. So this is one of these African-American inspired ideas that made it to the banjo, and it's prevalent in ragtime and jazz and ragtime piano, jazz piano, all kinds of music. And that sound of that forward roll is that. My rhythm would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But the emphasis is constantly changing in the right hand. So a song like Fireball Mail is almost all forward rolls. Not that, but this phrase, and this phrase, and this phrase, and this phrase, and not these phrases. A song like I'll Never Shed Another Tear, a great Flatt and Scruggs vocal tune, started with that technique that Earl Scruggs put there, where that is a forward roll with the left-hand techniques added. So that's going to be the topic for the next hour, and we're going to explore the ways that forward rolls are used for lead, for solos, create melodies, also to play backup both down the neck and up the neck. And if you've got questions as we go along, certainly enter them into the chat area and I will get to them. So if we look at the top of the page, I divided the forward rolls in a little bit of a different way. Even those of you who are more advanced students and have been taking lessons from me and seen all my handouts, this is a new handout. And I started to think about all of the different ways that the forward roll can be played, not just the way that we tend to play them when we're playing Earl Scruggs style banjo. And the challenge here, and this is why, in my humble opinion, this gets confusing for people, is that it's easy enough to understand that the forward roll is this pattern of T-I-M, T-I-M, T-I-M ad infinitum, but we have to control how to get in and out of it and how to organize the chord progression, the rhythmic structure of the roll so that it sounds organized and we don't paint ourselves into a corner. That's going to be a lot of what we talk about today. So if we're going to play a forward roll that is one measure long, remember these roll patterns are made up of eighth notes. The time signature that we're counting in is 4 beats per measure, quarter note equals 1 beat. If we're going to put the forward roll into one measure, where by default we're going to have 3 different options that I've written right at the top of the page. The first is 3 plus 3 plus 2. In other words, a group of 3 notes, group of 3 notes, a group of 2 notes. And we can manipulate that in 2 other ways. We can stick the group of 2 notes on the front and play 2 plus 3 plus 3. Less common is sticking the group of 2 in the middle and playing 3 plus 2 plus 3. Now, remember what we're doing here is we're confining that forward roll into one measure. So we're going to have that group of 2 in this measure by default. If we're going to play the forward roll for more than one measure, we can continue to play a pattern of 3 across the bar line. We'll talk about that in a little while. And so if you're an old-time player and you're just getting into finger picking, you want to control this idea of how to make the 8 notes fit neatly within the measure and where you're going to put the group of 2. So the first grouping is the second grouping, different strings, but let me back up actually. So can you see that we have a group of 3, another group of 3, and a group of 2. Now, those are just suggestions for the strings. As long as you're maintaining that order of fingers, you can play different strings. So you could play 3, 2, 1, 5, 2, 1, 5, 1. That would be perfectly acceptable. Actually, a little bit better. So in the second example, I've put the group of 2 on the front. And I've indicated in the tab I/T. And what that means is we're going to hit that first note either with the index or with the thumb, depending upon where we're coming from, what we're used to playing, and what feels right to us. Now, Earl Scruggs tended to start these rolls with his thumb whenever he could. But if you just played a thumb as an 8th note in the previous measure, you're going to be lost. You're going to be given an index finger there. Ralph Stanley used his index finger a lot more than his thumb. So I'm going to let the choice be yours, but I'm going to recommend that to get used to this pattern, let's use the thumb in as many places as we can. And so now with this version of the forward roll, we've got 2. I'm calling that a group of 2. This is like an artificial way to divide this stuff up, but hopefully it opens a door to understanding. So we have a group of 2, and then 2 groups of 3. Now this particular arrangement of notes within the forward roll I like a lot. It sounds driving, and if you can control just this roll for the G, C, and D chords, you've got something that sounds great for backup. And trying to play evenly, no bounce. Now, if we wanted to stick the group of 2 in the middle, that's the third measure. And again, you can play a variety of strings here. And I would suggest that while I'm giving you just one example, if you maintain the order of right-hand fingers and experiment with different strings, you'll come up with some exciting sounds that you've never played before, just by working these manipulations of these rolls. So that, in essence, is a one-measure forward roll. And the very first one, the 3 + 3 + 2, we're going to use for something at the end of the workshop called the In the Mood roll. It's a backup pattern. And then that second one, as I mentioned, is great for all kinds of driving backup. Now, a couple of new things there for the last 2 measures of this first line. Another way to think about the forward roll is once you've got the patterns going, you can start on a different finger. And then again, that opens up a world of possibilities here with variations. So the next to last measure of that first line indicates starting on the index. So what I did was I took the very first measure and I started on the second note. And then I caught the first note of the measure as the very last note. And it will feel and sound completely different. That's a different sound, but it's still a forward roll. So that's another way to manipulate these rolls, is to shift one note, shift 2 notes, and play again. If I started on the middle finger, in other words, going back to the first measure, starting on the third note, and then catching the 2 notes I left off at the end, that sounds like this. So, as you can tell, when you kind of explore that mode of creating variations, you've got innumerable variations that you can come up with. Now I want to keep going. So, I would love for you to fully explore all this. Take some time and explore the different combinations that you could come up with where you still have the forward roll within the measure. And have this be fun. In other words, just sit around and experiment and listen to what you're playing, listen to how it feels, shift the notes one beat, 2 beats, 3 beats. And then when we go back to the way that Earl Scruggs played these rolls, Earl's way will seem really easy because we're already experimenting with more complicated ways of doing these rolls. Now, the next step then is as we use these rolls in solos and also in playing what we call roll pattern backup. And in a bluegrass band, everybody has their own rhythmic roll to contribute to the band sound. And more often than not, the banjo's job is to play eighth notes. We're like the metronome beating the fastest. And so while we can accompany with techniques called vamping, which resemble in some ways what a guitar would play, the banjo, more often than not in a bluegrass band, is going to play those constant stream of eighth notes. Well, we can manipulate those eighth notes, forward rolls, by using different strings to highlight the chords that we're playing. And so as we move to line 2, we're now looking at forward roll variations. More ways to vary these rolls. And so for a C chord, for instance, I might take the roll that I presented on line 1, measure 2, just move all my third strings to the second string, and I've got a great forward roll pattern that I can play over a C chord. For backup, or if I'm playing a lead on the fly, if I know this roll really well and I want to insert it into a lead, go for it. Then back to G, I would go back to the third string. These are the same roll patterns. Same order of fingers that I'm striking in the right hand. That's the important kind of organizational rule that I'm using. Third string for the G, and then second string for the C. Then, if you look one measure ahead, I've got a great D pattern that Earl Scruggs oftentimes played for backup and lead, where instead of fretting the whole D major chord, I'm going to lift the pinky up, lift the middle finger up, and fret just the bottom notes. That roll, the order of fingers is the same as what we had for C and for the G measure 2, line 1, but the roll's a little more complicated. We've got 3-1, 4-3-1, 5-3-1. So for instance, just knowing those 3 variations, line 1, measure 2, line 2, measure 1, and measure 2, you can create some nice driving backup for lots of bluegrass songs that have those 3 chords, like Blue Ridge Cabin Home. There's a well-beat path on this old... And throw in a lick here. Slower. That creates a great sounding backup. The forward roll lends drive to your playing, where if you're playing an alternating thumb, I call that kind of a puppies and bunnies roll. It's a little bit too happy. Or a forward reverse roll feels really good in the hand, and it's a fine roll to use too, but again, it's that forward roll, that 3 against 2, that really gives the bluegrass banjo sound, its characteristic sound in the band. Now, so if you can master just that much and sound good and play pretty fast, people are going to like to play with you. You don't have to know a whole lot, but master a few things well. And so you can, put a check mark by measure 2, line 1, and then the first 2 measures of line 2. And learn those rolls, get comfortable with them. You want this stuff to be totally like moving it to a part of your brain where you're not even having to worry about it so much. Now, the last 2 measures of line 2, more variations on these rolls. And again, I'm encouraging you, if you have the time in your practice, to experiment. I'm left-handed actually, so when I warm up, I drill rolls all the time. And I will start, rather than just play the same rolls over and over again, I'll start to just think about what can I vary. And I mentioned this song, I'll Never Shed Another Tear, before. Do you see how I'm looking at line 2, measure 3. That roll pattern is almost exactly the same as the roll pattern on line 1, measure 2. There's 1 note difference. I'm starting on the 2nd string, but the rest of it is the same. So that roll sounds like this. I'm going to start with my thumb because I can. When Earl adds a hammer-on and a pull-off, that's the first phrase to this song, I'll Never Shed Another Tear. I used to sit alone at night. It's also the first measure to Shenandoah Valley Breakdown. Great Bill Monroe instrumental that Bill Keith recorded. So again, even more variations to the roll. We've got a basic idea, but then in this case, we're manipulating the inside strings. The first string, the middle finger, and the 5th string are rather fixed, but we can move the 2nd, 3rd strings up and down to get the melodies that we need. Now the last measure, I've been looking a lot lately at Ralph Stanley's banjo playing. This is another thing I've been doing during these last few months. Ralph Stanley's banjo playing is incredible. To play like he played in the late 50s and early 60s, it's amazing. But one of the things, he's just amazing. And talk about no bounce. It's very, very even. He tended to use his index finger where Earl Scruggs would have used his thumb. And I'm used to playing like Earl, and so when I go to try to play like Ralph, it's really difficult. But one of the things that Ralph did was he played a forward roll often in many solos where his index finger would go all the way down to the 4th string, which is something that Earl did not do very much. So the Ralph's 4th string index roll is this. Index finger all the way down to the 4th string. Now, if you're a subscriber to Banjo Newsletter Magazine, I tabbed out Ralph's solo to Long Journey Home from a 1961 informal recording. And the video of me playing it is posted on YouTube. It's a difficult solo for me to play, at any rate, if you're going to play it exactly like Ralph, because there's all those index fingers and the fourth string index, the index finger playing on the fourth string. That is another use of the forward roll that's very, very cool. Getting that index finger down on the fourth string. All right. Any questions so far about these one measure units? And yes, I'm just playing in G tuning. I hope that question came from an old time player, but because you use lots of different tunings in old time music. But this is the open G chord.
Yeah, I think that's the only question we've had so far. The only other question we've had is about downloading the worksheet, and I'm going to just go ahead and the handout. I'm going to go ahead and post that in there just in case anyone's having trouble downloading it. But super clear explanation, says Justine. So I think you can carry right on.
Let's keep going now. So when I'm teaching people one-on-one, all of you guys who have been students of mine, and that's a lot of you, you know all of this already. Knowing how to deal with the changes that we make to the one measure pattern then sets you up for two measure forward roll patterns. And this is what trips up a lot more people. But it's the two measure patterns that we use most frequently, especially in backup. And in songs like Fireball Mail, Will the Circle Be Unbroken? And that's where we go across the bar line and we keep that forward roll going. So for instance, the beginning of Will the Circle Be Unbroken would be Will the circle, that's all G notes in the melody. And most banjo players, and Earl Scruggs on the first volume of Will the Circle Be Unbroken, his banjo sounds great on that recording. His solo is... That forward roll just goes across the bar line. In Fireball Mail, same idea. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1. And then the melody is, of course, going to change at some point. But now we have to get used to how do we organize the forward roll when we have a two measure pattern so that we can tie it up in a little bow and then move on to another pattern. And this requires something that my good friend, I went to high school with him, John Lawless, who formed Accutab Publications back in the 1990s and now is in charge of the website Bluegrass Today. He came up with a way to think about this that is called the escape roll. And if you look at line 3, those two measure groupings end with an ITM, index, thumb, middle. In both cases, they're third string, fourth string, first string. They could be second string, third string, first string. That's still ITM as well. But what we're looking for here to manage the forward roll for lead or backup in a larger two-measure group is we want to try to end the two-measure or three-measure phrase with the middle finger. If we end with the middle finger on the first string, we're then set up to kind of think on our feet and go to anything that we need to in the next chord. So these next two patterns are really, really interesting and valuable for you. The first one, and the way that this unfolds will be a little different depending upon which forward roll you're using. This is the important concept to understand. And I'm presenting the two by far most common ways here, where the first roll is the 2 plus 3 plus 3, which I told you that I prefer. The second is 3 plus 3 plus 2. And what I'm talking about there is that the way the roll is organized. If you look at the first measure, at measure 10, the first example, it's an I or a T followed by an M and then a fifth string. Fifth string is the third note of the measure. The next grouping is TIM. So I'm adding a note and the fifth string is displaced 1/8 note. That displacement will then come into play when we get to the third beat of the second measure and we have to choose a note to prepare for the escape roll. I'm being very technical here. Much more, I don't think Earl Scruggs ever thought about this in this way, but he did play these phrases often. I'm analyzing it maybe too much because you guys are paying the big bucks. I'm trying to offer a good explanation here for you. But at any rate, let me play both of these for you, and this is, I'm hoping that you will say, oh, yeah, right, I've heard this before. And so the first example sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Second fret there at the end. Can also add a slide. Good questions coming in. I will answer them. Let me play the next example. The next example, different roll. It's a different variation on the forward roll, rather. So it starts TIM instead of TM. It's going to have a little bit of a different sound. There's that escape roll. And you can practice these ideas by just looping them, right? If I added a slide to it, that would sound like this. Just like Fireball Mail. For the first measure. Hey, and Valerie wins the prize. She found a mistake in the tab, and I have written the incorrect right-hand fingers there. At measure 11, it should read, instead of IMT, it should read ITM. Anything on the first string is going to be a middle finger and nothing else. All right, and Reed was that, yeah, Reed caught that too, so thank you, Reed. Karen asked a great question. So those of you who have studied with me, you know what I call these rolls. The forward reverse roll, sometimes called the forward backward roll, is a user-friendly pattern that goes like this. That's TIMT MITM. Well, the second measure, at measure 11, that one that we just corrected the right hand fingering for, if you look at that by itself, that's a forward reverse roll in terms of the order of the fingers, TIMT MITM. But I'm not thinking about it in this context in this way because it's a continuation of the forward roll that we started in measure 1. And also the reason why I'm not thinking about it in this way is that if I'm choosing to play the forward roll that I'm presenting in the next measure, measure 12, then when you get to the second measure, you can't play a forward reverse roll and have it work out right. You're running out of fingers and running out of room. So whatever way works for you, go for it. The whole key here, though, in mastering these two measure patterns is thinking about how you're going to end it, so you can start it again. So that's the key. If you are a subscriber to my Bluegrass Banjo course on Peghead Nation, I teach a couple of lessons in Down the Neck Backup where we explore this. This is a big, big topic right here, using these two measure forward roll patterns. So we're just getting our feet wet. But what is something that is just really, really practical to know in terms of playing along with others in jam sessions is being able to control these forward rolls and then moving from one chord to the other. 9-pound hammer. And mixing up those 1 measure and 2 measure patterns. You get comfortable with that, and then you can add some licks, and you are on your way. Rick Silver says that he likes my t-shirt that says Egghead Nation, Peghead Nation there. I have an Ear Trumpet Labs t-shirt, and if my shirt is covering the word trumpet in a particular way, it says something that I don't want you to think I'm associated with. I'll just leave that hanging in the air. But at any rate, Egghead Nation, yes, indeed. All right. And thank you to Peghead Nation and Homespun Music Instruction for sponsoring these workshops, by the way, and the concert tour, which they've both done for many, many years. I want to keep going, all right? Let's just keep talking about how we use forward rolls. Let's now get into how forward rolls tend to be used when we play melodies, when we're playing leads, playing solos to vocal tunes, or songs like Fireball Mail. Any number of songs will have forward rolls in them. And now what becomes important is adding what we call left-hand embellishments, slides, hammer-ons, and pull-offs. We will vary the roll in order to grab a particular note. Now, one way that the forward roll tends to get used a lot is if any melody that we're trying to represent on the banjo, a singing song melody, is going to be a mix of long notes and short notes. And I'm getting washed out a little bit here, so I'm going to close my blinds and see if this helps. The afternoon sun in New Mexico is coming through the window. That's a little better. Let me try it even a little bit more. All right. We had 10 inches of snow about 2.5 weeks ago, by the way. So, yeah, that's better. Okay. Now, so any melody that we're playing is a combination of long notes and short notes. So if you take, like, Will the Circle Be Unbroken? Will the circle, short, short, long, long. Short, short, long, long. Lost all my money but a $2 bill. And people who analyze how the brain, listens to music and learns music will say that we learn rhythms at a more primordial, basic level than melodies. And so rhythm is really, really important. Well, what the forward roll does that is so key to the sound of bluegrass banjo is that it allows the banjo player to represent a long-held note. So, for instance, that 2-5 slide. So now, if we look at measure 14, Fireball Mail, that's the first couple of measures that Earl Scruggs plays on the Foggy Mountain Banjo album, and the melody is "Here She Comes." And what that forward roll allows us to do is to give. It's almost like an illusion because we're hitting the note over and over again, but for the banjo literate listener, that's not an oxymoron, we've got a long sustained note in the melody. Will the circle. There's a Flatt and Scruggs song called No Mother and Dad. Brother and I. So again, learning that basic phrase that's in measure 14, at least the first measure, offers a way for you to play a great intro to any solo that goes to the G note in the melody. But what the forward roll is doing is creating the idea of a sustained note as a singer would sing it. And then the 2-5 slide on the 4th string, followed by the 3rd string open, reinforces that melody note. And also the way that the singer would sing this is swooping up to it too. So, will the circle. So we're trying to capture the nuances of a singer as well in our use of slides, hammer-ons, and pull-offs. I have a very good friend, a banjo player in the Bay Area named Larry Cohey, and we were talking about Earl Scruggs once. We talk about Earl Scruggs a lot. But he was saying he condensed a very important concept into one sentence. And he said that when Earl wanted you to hear a note as important, he wanted to represent a note that he felt was important, he played it twice. What does that mean? Well, in this context, it means that you're sliding up to the G note, and then I slid too far that time, and then you hit it again. You play it twice. then as the roll goes on, you keep hitting that note to give the impression that the melody is sustained. The forward roll is really the only roll that can do this in Scruggs style. At least it does it the best. Now, if we look at now measure 16, we're on line 4. Lots of songs go up to the D note, the first string. Well, don't forget that we're always, playing these roll patterns when we're playing solos. If we can find the D note on the lower string, and then again, the typical bluegrass technique is to go into it with a 2 to 3 hammer-on, we can emphasize that melody again by hitting it twice. And now, because we're now starting on the second string, we're going to, by default, use a little bit of we're going to use a TM variation on the forward roll. In other words, the forward roll that starts with the group of 2. Where the other pattern started with the group of 3. This is how we're using this stuff. And that's why it's good to keep it straight in one's mind. So a great way to start a solo like Sitting on Top of the World. It was in the spring, that high D note. You could do an intro, kind of a standard intro, and then going to that tab. Another use of the forward roll right there if I continued the solo. It was in the spring, one sunny day. The melody note is now a B note. Day. So again, that common use of the forward roll. I just demonstrated what I actually have written at measure 19 for You Are My Sunshine. How do we represent the B note if we wanted to have to relate in our solo a B note that's the melody note that's held by the singer for a while? Again, a roll that starts with the TIM, but again playing the note twice, sliding up to it, and then hitting that second string. Another song that starts with the 2 to 3 hammer-on that we see in measure 17 is On and On. Traveling down. There's a bunch of others too. All right, we are doing really well time-wise, and as a matter of fact, we're going to be actually probably finished with time for questions, which is wonderful. Now, so I mentioned that when we were learning the 2-measure patterns back at measure 10, line 3, that these are the kind of patterns that we use in down the neck backup. And if you listen to a lot of contemporary bluegrass stuff that's been done in the last 15 or 20 years, you'll hear the banjo in the texture of the whole band, more or less just playing roll patterns the entire time, oftentimes down the neck. Some of the earlier recordings, like Flatt and Scruggs and J.D. Crowe, the Bluegrass Album Band, there'll be a verse where the banjo might play some fancy up the neck backup with lots of cool licks or vamp. These days, with a 5-piece band, there's almost always somebody to handle the backbeat, the mandolin, the dobro, or the fiddle. So the banjo ends up playing roll patterns almost throughout. So if you're enjoying the music of Blue Highway or Alison Krauss and Union Station, you can hear that banjo just going the whole time. This is amazingly fun for the banjo player because we never stop. We just keep going all the time. And so knowing what to do, how to play creative and interesting down the neck backup is essential. Hey, and a great person to listen to for this kind of playing, as well as so many other things, is Alan Mundy, one of my heroes, M-U-N-D-E, and he's still out there playing. And if you're looking for a specific record to check out, Roland White did a record called I Wasn't Born to Rock and Roll, and then you turn the album over and it says, But I Love to Cook. But the album is called I Wasn't Born to Rock and Roll, and it was just released about 5 years ago as a CD, and I bet it's on streaming services as well. And as part of that album, Roland, with Alan Mundy on banjo, plays an 11-minute bluegrass banjo, an 11-minute bluegrass vocal standard melody where they go from one song to the other, and Alan is just playing this great sounding backup from beginning to end, and it's a great thing to listen to. Okay, so two examples of how to use these 2-measure patterns, adding a little bit of left-hand work to create some backup for a G chord. So I'm now at measure 21, the next to bottom line, measure 3, down the neck back up. This phrase sounds like this. And then going into the C chord. great pattern. There's to create lots of great banjo sounds, but then also lead the listener in your backup to the next chord, like a guitar player will do with bass runs on his instrument. We're going to capture that similar kind of idea with roll patterns, moving from one chord to the other. There's a way, leading up to C. Measure 23, the bottom line, is the same idea for a G chord, but now using the different roll, starting right in with the slide. And those of you who have taken lessons with me where we've discussed down the neck backup using forward rolls, you've seen this before. But maybe it's time to learn it now. And you can create these for C chords and D chords too. So here's a pattern for G, C, and D using these same ideas. 2, 3, 4. Throwing a lick at the end of the progression. I'll tell you what I'll do when we're done today with my session. I will go grab my forward rolls and down the neck backup sheet, and I will post the most recent version of that in the chat so that you all have access to it, because I'm hinting at it and I'm playing a lot of things from it and I want you to have it. One more way that we use the forward roll is in up the neck backup. And remember, up the neck is this way, down the neck is this way. Unless you happen to have been talking to Earl Scruggs. Earl Scruggs referred to up the neck as that way because it's further, and down the neck this way. And of course, if you're at a cocktail party with Earl Scruggs, you're not going to say, Earl, excuse me, that's wrong. But these days, this is up the neck, this is down the neck. And up the neck, is, as I was saying, is a very exciting thing to do in backup, accompanying others, and accompanying a vocalist specifically. You don't want to do it all the time. You would do it maybe when there's one verse where you're going to be kind of the focus is always on the singer, but one of the great things about bluegrass is that the texture of the music is always changing, and instruments will step forward and move backward in various ways to back each other up. And with great musicians in a jam session, this happens spontaneously, which is beautiful. It happens, musicians are listening to one another, they're sharing the space, but you want to be ready to step forward when it's your turn to play some fancy backup. And you'll hear this in the recordings of Flatt and Scruggs and also J.D. Crowe with the Bluegrass Album Band. If you're not familiar with the Bluegrass Album Band, there's 5 or 6 LPs that were released from the early 1980s through the mid-1990s. Tony Rice, great singer, guitar player, Doyle Lawson, the mandolin player, Bobby Hicks, the fiddler, J.D. Crowe, the banjo player. And they re-recorded many old standards from Bill Monroe, the Stanley Brothers, Flatt and Scruggs, Jimmy Martin, and the Osborne Brothers. In Berkeley, many of these were recorded in Berkeley. And J.D. Crowe, his banjo is all the way over to one channel. It's very easy to hear it. And these recordings made by these great second-generation musicians are now classics themselves. But if you're not familiar with those, listen to those because they're great case studies in wonderful bluegrass banjo playing. But at any rate, the In the Mood backup pattern comes from the Glenn Miller song In the Mood. You have to be a certain age to remember who Glenn Miller is. There was the big band era back in the 1930s. I wasn't quite there for that, but I used to spin a big band radio show on Sunday mornings in Virginia, so I got to hear all that music. Great music. And this is the music that Earl Scruggs was listening to on the radio as he was driving from one place to the other with, as a youngster or later on working professional musician. They were listening to big band music. Well, we're looking now at the last line, and that measure squeezed right in the middle. Up the neck, back up, in the mood, one measure. Again, that forward roll is the 3 + 3 + 2 that we started with at the very top of the page. But we're now utilizing up the neck. And a lot of times what you'll see players do up the neck is they won't use the exact same rolls that they use down the neck, because the 5th string is now lower pitched than the chord. And it sounds funny. And so, again, based off of Earl Scruggs and Don Reno, Sonny Osborne, and J.D. Crowe, they came up with slightly different patterns. And so this forward roll is going to sound like this, the one measure pattern. I'm trying not to bounce, but accent the 1st string. I could go through an entire backup to Blue Ridge Cabin Home using just this idea. There's a well, C, sliding, and let me go all the way up. Very satisfying. I could slide on the 4th string instead of the 3rd. Again, same roll, just hitting the 4th string. Now, so that's one way of using this pattern. I just realized 45 minutes into the workshop that if I raise my chair here, this will be easier. You'll be able to see me more easily. So the very last pattern on the page is 2 measures. And again, this involves the same idea of how are we going to control the end of the forward roll so that we can start another pattern? Well, we've got an escape roll at the end, the ITM. And then if you look at the tablature, there is a slur, it's called a slur, or sometimes called a tie, over right in the middle of that second measure, joining the 2 10th fret first strings. What that's indicating really is that that note that is the first 10th fret is really a quarter note. If you look below the second 10, there's no right hand indication. So we basically, it sounds like a pause at that point. And this 2-measure pattern sounds a lot like Glenn Miller's In the Mood. So it's gonna, remember that song? Da 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 da. It's like that. That's what this lick is gonna be. So if I place that right into Blue Ridge Cabin Home, I've got something very neat that works in a really tidy way because it's 2 measures of G, C, D back to G. There's a well-beat path. Love that sound. You can even, once a jam session, you can go all the way up here for the C. I don't recommend doing it more often than once or twice because people might not like it too much. But at any rate, that's something that you can use all up and down the neck. So that is another use of the forward roll. Another thing that we do with the In the Mood lick is, again, using the same forward roll, we can fret the 5th string. And the most common way that players will do this is for a D7 chord in the key of G. If I wrap my thumb around the 5th string, opposite my index, wherever I am with this F shape, that gives me a 7th chord. All right? And if I change the roll just a little bit, I've got a pattern that sounds really, really nice, incorporating that 7th. And then, if I'm going to go all the way up to the G, and I can actually move the thumb down 1 fret, and that gives me technically a G6th chord. I've never heard Earl or Sonny or JD ever use that expression, but it's just a nice passing note within the chord. My hand is so small that I can't really fret all 4 of these at the same time, so sometimes I'll slide up to it, then lift up, and fret everything else. We suffer for our art. So that's a very nice kind of happy sound. C chord and the D7. So the forward roll is also used in up the neck backup as well. So we have covered a lot of stuff here with how to use the forward roll. So let's review just a minute. Take time and work with those roll patterns at the top of the page and spend some time just letting your mind wander a bit to come up with variations for 1 measure, the ways to control that so you know where you are when you get to the first beat of the next measure. Then try some 2-measure patterns, keeping mindful that the escape roll is a great way to tie it in a bow so that you could then move on to another pattern. And then think about the songs that you're already playing and how they incorporate forward rolls into them. If you're playing some Earl Scruggs transcriptions, think about how by using the 2-note idea, if Earl wanted you to hear a note that was important, he played it twice. We've got the G note with the 2 to 5 slide of forward roll. We have the D note, 2 to 3, and then the B note coming up from the 3rd string to the B note. And then we talked about the use of the forward roll in 2-measure segments for backup. The next step, once you're in control of these rolls, is to think about how to voice lead from one chord into the other. I've got some lessons available on Peghead Nation where I talk about the idea of target tones, which is where you pre-select a note in the new chord. It's not rocket science. It's going to be just 1 or 2 different notes. And then you find a way with your escape roll to play into that note. After you practice some of these patterns diligently, it does kind of creep into your head and it becomes really easy and a kind of a free process. And once you learn it really well for a couple of chord progressions, every subsequent one gets easier in terms of thinking of how to fill up the space. And then we ended with talking about the In the Mood roll as a great way to play some up the neck, back up to impress everybody. I see there are some questions. And the first question way up top was to talk about pick noise. And, you know, that's an interesting concept and opens up something we could talk about in a whole other workshop on playing technique. Where pick noise normally comes from, is that string is already vibrating, but then your finger comes in again, and I'm using my index finger here. If you hesitate just for a minute, there's a little bit of a sizzle. Can you hear that? A little bit of a sizzle. That's what you want to eliminate. So I think that for most people, the biggest issue with pick noise is not hitting the string squarely when it's time to hit. That can play into pick angle sometimes, but more often than not, it's just the movement of the fingers. So I practice roll patterns slowly. I did it today with the metronome, really slowly for about 20 minutes before I played anything else. And that's the time that I really think about this. How are my fingers moving? Am I hitting the strings right on the beat? Is there pick noise? Then let me figure out why there is pick noise if I hear it. Normally, what it tends to be is that we're hesitating in some way with the motion of the finger to create that sizzle. It's something that we work on forever. The backward roll, there's something called a forward backward roll or a forward reverse roll, and the pattern for that is T-I-M-T-M-I-T-M. It's used quite a bit in all kinds of great playing. A backward roll is the reverse of a forward roll. And that tends to get used by players when the melody note might be on the first string and we want to hit that first string on the first beat, so a backward roll is really convenient. So the song Home Sweet Home, that melody note is on the first string. Ground Speed also uses backward roll segments as well. By important note, what I mean is the melody note. It's not necessarily held longer than an eighth note. So for instance, in Fireball Male, measure 14, the important note is the G note. That's the melody. So I'm not letting that last longer. I'm incorporating it into the roll, but I'm hitting it twice. Okay? Certainly, when you're trying to think up a solo, the melody notes that tend to fall on the downbeat of each measure, the first beat of each measure, are really important notes, and those are the ones that you want to spend some time looking for. And if you figured out that the melody note that you're looking for is a G note, let's make it sound better by sliding underneath. If the melody note is a D note, let's hammer on from the one string underneath to that D. So that's what I mean by that. Great question about the rhythmic placement of the slide in relationship to the roll. And keep in mind that the tablature is just a visual representation, and people will do different things. Most of the time, I do tend to think of the slide as moving into the next note. So, like the Cripple Creek slide. The roll that we use for the way that most people play the second part of Cripple Creek is an alternating thumb roll, right? We add the 2 to 3 slide, and if I wasn't thinking too much about it, if I was just reading tablature and I'd never heard Earl play it, I might go and just glomming the technique on, which is good thing to do. But the way that Earl uses it is he's thinking about what the melody is, which is going up Cripple Creek, going in a run. So when you hear him play it, it leads right into the slide leads right into the next note. And that's how I try to do it most of the time. All right, let me look at these other questions here. Wherever in the examples I see a measure ending with ITM, is that an escape roll? Yes, I didn't mark it with every single appearance of it. And so with the forward roll, do you mostly use the D chord that is 2-4, not 2-3-4? Great question, Betsy. It depends. Either one. They both sound good. The key is that the phrase that I gave you in this tablature is classic Earl, and you can fall back on that and have a lot of confidence at any time. But you may find yourself, that's fine too, playing a tune like John Hardy, you know, that's kind of a common way to use the roll too. So either way is fine as long as you know how to get out of it using the escape roll. And Theodore wants to throw some pinches in. Yes, terrifically great. If you listen to Earl Scruggs' playing from when he played with Bill Monroe, great recordings. That's the world's first bluegrass band. Earl was 24, 25 years old. Think about that. What were you doing when you were 24 or 25 years old? But it's like he was trying to crack the problem of, I'm going to play these roll patterns and I'm never going to stop, but I'm going to try to play a melody. So if you listen to this great song called Will You Be Loving Another Man from Bill Monroe, Earl's solo is something like this. It was really rough, but he never stopped. Later on, in the early 50s, for his solo, he started thinking about phrasing. If we were a horn player or we're a singer, phrasing is really, really important. You have to figure out where you're going to take a breath so that you play the next phrase. Well, banjo players, we tend not to think about phrases. It's just, let's play, let's never stop, let's keep going. Well, Earl Scruggs would oftentimes punctuate things or define phrases by using pinch patterns. So like... choose the best example here. But at any rate, so oftentimes I'll use a pinch at the very end. If we've got two measures of G at the end of the progression, I'll play a fill-in lick, and this is the most commonly played fill-in lick here, and a pinch pattern to catch my breath. If I'm playing a solo, I might play at the end of a progression a lick, and then my intro, which would also maybe be made up of quarter notes. But yes, definitely pinches are great. It's 157. What do you know? On the handout, what do you mean by the letters T-I-M? Okay, that great question, an important one. The tablature is an expression in visual form of what we're playing on the banjo. Each line represents a string. That's different than musical notation. We have 5 strings, so it's the same number of strings as a regular musical staff. The top line represents the first string. The bottom line represents the 5th string. So it's like I'm looking down on my banjo. And then the numbers refer to fretted positions. And we write the chords up above, and if we go ahead and fret that chord that we are being asked to play, sure enough, all the numbers fall into place. The letters underneath stand for the right-hand fingers, thumb, index, and middle. And then we indicate embellishments with an S for slide, an H for hammer-on, a P for pull-off. I do have a book called Bluegrass Banjo for Dummies that I would be happy to sell you in my store, BillEvansBanjo.com. There's a brand new cover, by the way, and there's a little bit of new content inside as well. But that is a great book to get you started in every way with bluegrass banjo. There's also a companion book called Banjo for Dummies that teaches clawhammer and bluegrass and historical styles too. So there's nothing says I love you like a Banjo for Dummies book for Christmas for your loved one, or even someone you don't like. It kind of works either way, really. Beautiful thing. All right. So, yes, The tip jar, if you want to contribute more, by at any point, it will be split evenly among the three of us and the Freight and Salvage Coffee House, by the way. Thank you so much. So we're going to take a 15-minute break and get ready for Clawhammer, all right? And all you bluegrass players, hang around. Don't go anywhere. This is going to be incredible. Allison is amazing. I love clawhammer banjo playing and understanding how it works a little bit. She's not going to be teaching to real beginners, but maybe there'll be enough time where she can talk a little bit about her right hand technique and how it all works. Okay. And yes, Allison has updated her handout, and thank you, Allegra. She has linked to it right now. She's going to teach a tune called Stillhouse. Is that the name of the tune? Stillhouse, I think. All right. And she's going to teach you another one by ear. All right, I am going to turn off the recording, and I will turn it on again, Allegra, I promise. And I will be back with you in just a couple minutes, and we'll welcome Allison when she comes in. Will you watch Allegra for that? All right. Thanks, everybody. Bill at BillEvansBanjo.com. If you want to email me with any questions, please do so. There you go. And if you're interested in checking out my lessons on pegheadnation.com, if you use the coupon code BILLE, you can check out the whole course for a month. So what you could do is you could enter the coupon code, pay nothing, download the tabs to all 75 lessons, and never pay a thing. You could do that. So, all right, I will be back soon, and thank you again for joining us. We're just getting started.